The Edifice Complex podcast is brought to you by DCM, the Drawing Specialists, Blue Rhythm Commissioning Software, and Sensor Suite, the future of intelligent buildings.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex, the property design and development podcast. Let your hosts Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean keep you up with who is innovating and doing great work, perspective on the adjacent possible, and challenges to the status quo.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex. I'm Robert Bean, your co-host and unofficial mediator, here with my colleague, official agitator, friend, and Yoda of everything to do with buildings, Mr. Adam Muggleton. Say hello, Sir Adam.
Hello there. So this is interesting. This is like that Star Trek episode where they enter a parallel world, right? The two podcasters who are of a certain age meet two podcasters of a certain age, right?
Yeah. It's funny. We, as some of you know, our podcast, Edifice Complex podcast, came about from a bar discussion. I don't even know where. I can't remember. Were we in Albuquerque, Adam?
It was in the US somewhere. It was an ASHRAE meeting, and you was on a break, and I was on a break from something, and I cornered you in a bar and pitched you. I remember that.
Yeah, and that's how it all started. And then in this parallel universe was this other podcast that, out of all the podcasts, I think in the world of buildings and property development, was a leader, and I ended up on the show a couple of times and always was a big fan. And I think today, before we introduce our guest, I think there are like 660 episodes or 670 episodes. Like, it's an archive of probably some of the most smartest people that I know of anywhere when it comes to buildings and individuals within buildings and the whole science of indoor environmental quality and architecture and the building sciences. So we have a guest on today that is one of the founders, and that's Joe Hughes from IAQ Radio. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam. Welcome. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Robert. I don't know who was speaking. Robert was speaking, right?
So unfortunately,
I'm not used to being on this side of things here, Robert. So be patient with me.
So yeah, well, Joe, like sometimes you have your foot on the boat and some on the dock, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so unfortunately, we don't have Cliff with you today, and but we do send our best regards to Cliff because he's the other part of your team there, the tag team. Tell us, like, how did you get started? I mean, you guys have been just a leader in this whole world, and give our listeners sort of a background story.
Well, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick, who's my co-host here, he and I also have a company called IAQ Training Institute, and we did training for mold remediation, indoor environmental quality inspection. We've done some other training as well over the years, mostly to do with water damage, disaster restoration, those types of things. He was listening to a business show one time, and he heard one of the guests talk about this new podcasting thing. This is almost 16 years ago now we started this show. And it was a business show, and they were talking about how they had invested in and they were putting together this podcasting platform, I guess you would call it, called TalkShoe, and sort of like the old Maxwell Smart, you talk into the shoe. Yeah. And so he said, Joe, I think you'd be good at this, and I'd be happy to help out with it. So why don't we give it a try? And here we are, 16 years later. We're kind of the old guard in the podcasting realm. We've since we've expanded what we do, and we now do a YouTube video as well as a podcast that we put up on Podbean.
Yeah. So the list of your guests, really, Joe, it's like the who's who. And do you remember who your first guest was? Bad question.
Well, I think it might have been maybe Harriet Burge. I know Dr. Dietrich Weil, who was our he was our technical director at the time, and he was with us for about 6 or 7, maybe even 8 years. I know he was on the show. I think maybe Harriet Burge, and I remember a show we did way back. It was called Carpet Monsters and Killer Spores. And the name of the gentleman that we had on, he was a professor at the Miami of Ohio University and had just written this book and had put it out. And the name will come to me as we go along here. But I believe he was on one of the earliest shows as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, when you think about, and I guess one of the things that I also am impressed with the show is that, as you've been on your continuum, you've gone on both sides and expanded into multiple disciplines, like not just air quality, but it's been the building sciences and it's been the human sciences, and you've sort of created this basket of knowledge that's invaluable.
Well, we've got 3 baskets, essentially. The indoor air quality basket, where we've had people like Dr. Burge and J. David Miller and Don Weeks and many others that are well known in that arena. But we also wanted to cover disaster restoration in part because that's a part of indoor air quality. Obviously, when you're dealing with disasters and the cleanup afterwards, one of your first focuses should be, how will the air quality be when we're done with this project? Mm-hmm. And also because Cliff was a pioneer in the disaster restoration world. He manufactured products. He did training programs. He's been involved in disaster restoration for 45 years or so now. And we realized early on as well that the importance of building science to both of those areas. We were going to Joe Steebrook's building science summer camp for a long time now. Cliff was one of the first people up there in the very early days, and we realized that we needed to talk about building science as well. And that's when we got people, a lot of the ASHRAE type people, yourself and many others involved with the show.
Mm.
Yeah. I've got to say, 16 years, tip of the hat for being early in, man. That 16 years ago, I don't think I was even aware of a thing called a podcast, and I'm a tech nerd. So tip of the hat on that. 16 years, that's a lot of consistency. And I think when you're doing a show like ours and yours, consistency really matters. People need to know it's coming, need to know it's of a certain level, right? And it's going to be worthwhile at that time. So well done on that, I have to say. Yeah, and the guest list speaks for itself, really. But just on the restoration side of it, that must be a growing area, right? I mean, every time you turn the news on, there's a flood, there's a hurricane, there's this, there's that, and there's houses being wiped out. So I guess in the States particularly, because it's such a big territory, right? That must be a growing sector, right?
Yes, it is, and it's a sector that's become more popular with venture capitalists as well. There's a lot of money pouring into that sector. There are large companies now that didn't exist 5 years ago that are buying up disaster restoration companies and putting them under the umbrella of whatever. For instance, one of our best sponsors is First On Site. Right. First On Site's a big restoration company nationwide. I believe they'll probably be going worldwide. And there's a lot of money going into the disaster restoration world. It's a very interesting area.
Fascinates me. So there's 2 schools of thought on that, right? So should insurance companies be insuring properties that are in disaster zones, right? Because there's a moral hazard to that, right?
Yep.
But the flip side of that is why not? And it creates jobs, I guess. There's the other side. I don't know. Sometimes the cynical side of me kicks in, but disaster. I'm a big fan of restoration. One of my favorite building projects is where they take an old building that's derelict and repurpose it and reuse it. A great example of that in the UK is an old power station called the Tate. They took an old power station on the Thames in London and repurposed it into a museum of modern art. And they really kept the structure and everything. So that whole building got a brand new lease of life. Mm-hmm. That is restoration for me. That's the wins there are great. You're not knocking it down. You're not losing the embodied carbon. You're repurposing it. I love that. I think that should be a much bigger sector than it actually is, but that's just me.
Well, and I think disaster restoration, as opposed to just, restoration, is also something that's growing worldwide. I know in the UK that they've been dealing with disaster restoration for many years, but it's now it's an up and coming thing in Australia and in the rest of Europe. This whole idea of trying to respond to fires and floods and earthquakes and things of that nature. Many people are seeing that there's a definite need there, and they're jumping in and getting involved in that business.
Interesting.
Because building construction and engineering was just too easy in the beginning. We may as well throw disasters in there now, right?
Well,
that's like an equation, right? Is that
but you're a commissioning guy, and you guys are involved in helping people get buildings designed and built and so on. There's a much bigger emphasis now on not just designing and building a healthy building, but a resilient building that's going to stand up to things like heat waves and fires and smoke and water damage, because it's going to happen.
Something I'm seeing in the UK was really interesting. So it's almost becoming politically unacceptable to knock down big buildings and rebuild them because of the loss of embodied carbon. The most sustainable building is the one you don't knock down, right? But the one you retrofit. So there's a great example. There's a skyscraper in London, and they were going to knock it down and build a new one. And then the mob came for them on social media. And in the end, they backed down and did it as a resto mod. So they took it back and they're just going to reclad it and redo it. So it's still a massive project, right? Massive, £350 million. That's a $500 million project, but they're not knocking it down. And I think restoration and resto mods, it's a bit like cars, right? Resto mod Porsches. I think the building sector is going to move towards resto mods. In that, you've got a downtown court, you've got a skyscraper. Let's not knock it down. Let's repurpose it. So I don't know. I think that business is an undiscovered future growth business, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. And it's funny you mentioned cars, because there are some similarities with the way auto insurance and disaster homeowners insurance have kind of grown over the years. It used to be when you wrecked your car, you could take it anywhere and they would fix it up, and you'd send the bill to the insurance company. The insurance company would pay it. Well, if you've been involved in an accident here recently, you'll know that more often than not, you're going to take photos of what happened. You're not going to see an insurance adjuster. You're going to take it to their preferred provider, and they have much more control over the costs and the quality of the repairs. There's been similar trends, or at least they've tried similar things in the disaster restoration world, but it's a lot more difficult because you've got so many different variables as opposed to a car, which is it can be very complex, but, different buildings and different geographies, different climates, different, different sizes, different reasons for having that building. I mean, they haven't been able to, at this point, standardize the insurance side of things as much as they have on the auto collision side of things.
Yeah. But it brings a question in terms of, and I know both you and Cliff went through this with a number of associations. So not only in terms of the standardization and certifications, but we see it in the commissioning world, where there's many commissioning agent associations, just like there has been many associations in the restoration business. And I don't remember what year it was, Joe, but there was a lot of turmoil that went on in terms of merging organizations and that kind of stuff. How did that all eventually spin out? Were you able to pull everybody together?
Well, yes and no. It was a challenging time when, at the time, the Indoor Air Quality Association was a big player in the indoor air quality world. They've since kind of tapered off quite a bit, and I believe, and a lot of the leadership believe that part of the reason they tapered off was the fact that they had this kind of consolidation that didn't go quite as well as they would have liked. Although the certifying group, I think, is pretty happy with what they've ended up with. That's the American Council for Accredited Certification. But Indoor Air Quality Association kind of has lost their main reason for people coming to them back in the early days was to get certified in either mold remediation or as an indoor environmentalist. When they gave that up to the ACAC, I think it hurt them. And it's been a tough climb to get back into being relevant in the world again, in the industry again. And during that time, you've also seen groups like, ASHRAE's gotten much more involved in indoor air quality. The IICRC, which is the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, they are much more involved in indoor air quality as opposed to just disaster restoration. So they've kind of branched into that area a little bit more. And again, it's squeezed out the Indoor Air Quality Association. But recently on the restoration side, the good news is that, the IICRC and the Restoration Industry Association are working a lot more closely together and a lot more cooperatively. So it's been a mixed bag.
Yeah. Adam, and we've talked about this when we've had people from different associations on. Yeah. And I think ultimately that society benefits when there's consistency within certification programs. Yeah. And it's difficult to make that happen when you have 3 or 4 or 5 different associations and they're all trying to create a leadership position. But it just, I'm all for competition and I'm all for, the free market as much as the crap it creates. Yeah. But there is a need for the benefit of society, a consistent message and consistent in certification. I just think that's the way to go.
I'm curious on the commissioning side. It's been a while since I've really looked at it, but how many different certifications are there, and are they third-party accredited certifications? That was the big thing back in the day.
You've asked the right question. So at this point, the market wants a single source of truth and a single source authority, right? That's what the desire is. And let's just take building design in general. ASHRAE tends to fill that role, as a lobbying and as a source of guides. And, if you're taken to court and you've designed the building world, you reference the ASHRAE guys to show that you've done it properly, right? In commissioning, last time I checked, it was a few years ago, there are 16 different certifications to become a commissioning provider. Some consist of a weekend in a hotel, conference room, and the others consist of 8-hour engineering exams, right? So there's a continuum of rubbish to quality, right? The trouble is the market has a real problem identifying which is the good, the bad, and the ugly in that 16. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the reasons commissioning doesn't get taken as seriously as it should. So commissioning industry really does need a consolidation, serious consolidation down to 2 or 3 max. I talk about this sometimes at conferences. So I was speaking at the Building Commissioning Association conference, and at the end of my presentation, I started talking about them merging with this other firm, and the president shouted out to me, "Adam, you doing this again? Stop it!" You know what I mean? So
we had Jerry Udelson on a couple of times actually, and I think Jerry was saying at one point, well, you know what? I think there's as many as many shows that you and Cliff have done, Joe, there's the same amount of building programs.
Oh,
there's over 600
certifications.
What's that?
Green building certifications are over 600 in the world.
Yeah.
Legion
Wow.
of them.
600.
Yep.
If there was ever, the phrase paralysis through analysis, right? There's no better example. How the hell does somebody, choose or follow? I mean, it's, I don't know, the ethos in the WELL program, for example. I'm a big fan of the WELL program, the passive house, active house, those all seem like living building challenge is another one. The ethos of those programs are good. But how do you pick,
It's a thing called, there's an economic name for it. It's called overproduction of elites, certification inflation, right? So whenever I hire people, if they have like 5 or 6 acronyms off their name, that's a red flag for me. They're credential chasers. The amount of credentials after someone's name is inversely proportional to how actually good they are.
Because
Adam, you got me thinking right now. I'm thinking of an email I just saw the other day with the list of certifications behind his name that was a mile long. And
if you're an engineer, you need one thing after your name says PE, done. That's it. No one needs to know anything else about you. Don't want to know you got a master's or what your mum thinks. All we need to know is that you're a licensed engineer. That's it. Then after that, it's about your work, right?
I used to love when we were doing seminars for ASHRAE and as a moderator, and you'd get these individuals with their resumes, and the resume was longer than their presentation. Yep. Okay, hang on a second, like we're here for the content, right? If we want to know how great you are, we can go online and we can search up your name, right?
Any resume more than one page is a crime against humanity.
More than a sentence. I just say that when everybody's going to introduce me, I usually just say, try just a single sentence. The only exception to that is Joe is when you guys read my resume.
Well, I've got your current title is retired. I like that, Robert.
That's it. That's all you need to know.
I may have to steal that from you. I don't have a title behind my name. I may have to put retired or semi-retired. I don't know.
Use the acting acronym is resting.
Resting. There you go. I like that. I am trying to. Hey, by the way, I want to get the correct answer for the one question. The first show was Nicholas Money, who wrote Carpet Monsters and Killer Spores, A Natural History of Toxic Mold. And then Glenn Fellman, who was at the time, the executive director of the Indoor Air Quality Association. And I'd really feel bad if I neglected to mention Tom Iacobellis. Tom at the time was with Duct Busters. He was a big HVAC cleaning guy and very respected in the area. And he's now with Belfour. They went from Duct Busters to Ducts and they became the Belfour arm that does the HVAC systems cleaning, and very, very knowledgeable guy. In fact, they were on, I can't remember the name of the cruise ship, but the first cruise ship that got that got quarantined in Japan when COVID first started. They cleaned that up, and we did a fascinating show on that. In fact, we'll have to post that as a part of this.
Link in the show notes. Yeah. So let's talk about IAQ, because like restoration, like disaster restoration, there's an IAQ component to that. Your first episode, there's an IAQ component to that, mold and health, right? And having just gone through the pandemic, IAQ now is a much bigger conversation than it used to be, right? People talk about CO2 levels. So, IAQ, I think, is one of the less understood but more important things that nobody really talks about. I'd love to see more CO2 demand control type strategies, DOAS, dedicated outside air ventilation solutions. Because, taking that cruise ship, how they all got ill. It was all recirculated farts. going around, right? It's all recirculated air going everywhere. So I'm surprised the IAQ industry is not bigger than it is. You've got any thoughts on that?
I think it's bigger than we realize because it's not consolidated under one. We don't even have a proper name for it. We used IAQ Radio because back in the day when we started this, IAQ, indoor air quality, was more common as a description of the type of thing we were doing than what is used today, which is indoor environmental quality. Most people use IEQ. So I know that the way we describe and name things has been a real problem for, if you want to call it, the industry over the years. I want to mention also another group that's very involved with indoor air quality, and that's the American Industrial Hygiene Association. And they are the good old, they're like the IAQ Radio of the occupational and environmental health world. They just keep chugging along with that one excellent certification, the certified industrial hygienist. So in the IAQ world, IEQ world, if there was one designation I would say is probably the most respected other than, PEs and so on, it would be the CIH, the certified industrial hygienist.
Yeah, I'd agree with that for sure.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Can you find the drawing and supporting documents you need in less than a minute? Now you can with Echo. It's simple. Just type what you're looking for and press enter. Echo knows your building. Speak with a drawing specialist today. Ask about our special offer of painless onboarding plus 6 months free with Echo. Visit podcast.thedsoffer.com. That's podcast.thedsoffer.com.
And now, back to the show.
The problem there is that most of the CIHs of the world, they're more involved with commercial type work or, industrial workplaces, and they didn't really focus much on residential. And when residential indoor air quality became a kind of hot topic back in the 2000 era after this particular mold case called Ballard versus Farmers Insurance, and another case up in Cleveland where some children died from pulmonary lung bleeding, essentially, and they at first thought it might have been related to their exposure to some mold. Back in at that time, the industrial hygienists were focused more on commercial spaces, workplaces, and when this these incidents occurred in residential homes, it kind of left a bit of a gap there that somebody needed to fill in. Right. And that's when groups like the Indoor Air Quality Association and at the time the American Council, the American Indoor Air Quality Council, I believe they were called, and a few other organizations started to develop these training courses and certifications for indoor environmental quality to kind of fill that gap. You've got a residential indoor air quality or mold problem. If you call a CIH, they may or may not be familiar with that type of work, and they're probably going to be a little more expensive than your typical mold guy that learned some things in a course through Indoor Air Quality Association or others. And I think they filled a need that was there. I mean, we didn't have to have a very qualified, certified industrial hygienist out to look at an indoor air quality issue. We needed more generalists, and where we really needed help was they had to understand industrial hygiene so they could take samples and evaluate situations, assess the conditions. But in my opinion, always more importantly, they needed to understand building science more than the traditional industrial hygienists did. At the time, industrial hygienists were, focused more on occupational exposures and assessments and so on. And over time, they also have, gotten much better with building science, but that whole building science component was kind of missing. And I think the IAQA and other groups kind of helped to fill in the gap by getting people to understand, how does the HVAC system in combination with the building envelope make indoor air quality either better or worse, and how can we improve it? It wasn't so much that we needed to measure things as we needed to figure out what was wrong and then fix it, and then clean up the mess.
Joe, I'm so glad you said that, because if you recall, and I don't remember what year, but the event took place, you had I and Professor Tang Li on.
Yep.
And that was shortly after I wrote the first edition of the Indoor Air Quality Awareness course for the Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning Institute of Canada. You actually were one of the reviewers on that, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And I remember one of the challenges I had writing that course was the pushback against including building science in the program. And some of the hygienist type stuff also went into the program. And the industry, and this is just the industry in general, when you say the word IAQ, people's brains automatically go to HVAC.
Yeah.
They think about filtration, they think about humidity, they think that represents indoor air quality. The reality is that's this much, And when you think about, and you've had Joe Stiebrick on several times, I think, and talking about damage functions, and moisture is the number one damage function. And, building failures due to all kinds of moisture related issues. Well, that's not in the HVAC camp per se. I mean, there's dehumidification, which is part of it, but where that water comes from, how it's not controlled, and the resulting damage is something that most HVAC people aren't trained in.
Right.
So we still have that challenge today. And but anyways, I just wanted to bring that up because you were part of that in the very beginning. But I totally agree with you on the
that show's in 2009, by the way. So
was it really?
yeah, that's quite a while. Quite a while. But I guess what I would ask you two is, and I don't see much of this, but it seems like there should be a better building science curriculum available for anyone that wants to understand building science that may, that's a part of their project. Facility managers, HVAC people, indoor air quality people, they all need to understand building science. And I don't know that there's much available. Joe Stiebrick does a great job with his Fundamentals of Building Science program, but what's he do it 3, 4, 5 times a year for 20, 25 people? That's just not enough. Do you see anything on the horizon?
No. Well, there is curriculums that I think it was Waterloo is one, and then I think Carleton has a program, and U of T has a program. But those are all master's level courses. We need something that's down on the, like you said, the sort of the ground level training program.
You need practitioner level training.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because it's the practitioners that are going to implement this, right? And the reason it's not widely available, because you're talking about bringing a Venn diagram together here, right? So you talk about building science. You need systems thinking. You need building systems understanding, right? Just basic things like building pressurization and filtration is, to me, sounds simple. When I just throw that into conversations on projects. Is this building positively pressurized? And the blank looks that come back at me. It's like, I don't understand why the diffusers are dripping water in my lobby. I can tell you why. It's called building pressurization, And this is pretty basic stuff, right? So you've got to get it into college level, junior college level, and onwards. So it actually, I think, needs to be taught at, let's take a 4-year degree, right? So that 4 years is too long. Stop that. But let's pretend you can't stop that, right? 2 years of fundamentals. Then you need 2 years of applied engineering. And within that is a systems thinking course, a building science course, a building systems course about how they all overlap and interact, because it's the interactions that matter, right? Yeah. At the moment, our industry is siloed and thinks of IAQ in a in isolation and building science in isolation. No one's drawing those links between them. And it's the links that really matter, right?
That's right.
Well, I think we've had...
That's a bit of a rant. I need to calm down.
Well, Joe,
let's take it a step further here, Adam. Why not have this in K through 12 schools? I mean, we're teaching science. What better way to teach science than to use the kid's own home as the best example they can think of the type of scientific principles we're talking about, things like condensation. Why, when you take a shower in the winter, does water condense on the window?
Exactly.
These are things that people, even when they're done with college, oftentimes don't understand as well as they should. I mean, I think it should start even earlier.
You know, and
that's a great comment.
Point, because that could be part of a final year physics class, like applied physics, and then you're creating a generation that's going to understand that and demand that, and create a demand for that, right?
Well, an educated buyer now looking at buying buildings, houses, for example, right? I mean, there's people. I to this day, I can't believe like people will spend thousands and thousands of dollars and hours doing research work on vacations, automobiles. If they got to get surgery, they'll investigate to the nth degree, right? But when they spend $500,000 or $1 million on a house, they'll hand over the responsibility of the indoor environmental quality to somebody who doesn't know anything about indoor environmental quality. It's insane.
And then they'll get a house without a user's manual.
Right.
I bought a cardio something, the other day. It's got a user's manual that comes with it, but the biggest purchase I ever made in my life had no user's manual whatsoever. I had to figure it out on my own, and that's just crazy. I mean, we're backwards on these things. We've got user's manuals on the simplest things, but not on the most complex thing we deal with on a daily basis.
But you're onto something there. Someone going into like senior, sort of like high school level, and getting this in the curriculum and creating a bit of a rah-rah for the industry as well, right? Come on into this. Have a career here. There's a career here. There's things to fix. That creates demand. And, the only way the construction industry is going to change is if people stop buying rubbish and demand what they should have, right?
Well, and the other problem we have is there aren't real good, clear career paths in indoor air quality. How do you become an indoor air quality consultant? There's no clear path toward that. In fact, right now it's a mash of things. And a lot of the people in the indoor air quality world came in from other areas like HVAC, or a lot of them, believe it or not, actually were people who had problems, got sick. No one could figure out what their problem was, so they decided to go out and experiment on their own and figure it out. And some of the best inspectors, Jeff May comes to mind,
right?
Some of the best people out there doing this type of work came from a situation where they were ill for whatever reason from an indoor environmental quality issue, and they had to figure it out on their own. Carl Grimes comes to mind, May Dooley, these are all people who've been on my show, and they're really well respected in the industry.
Do you know, one of the things I like about the insurance sector in the US, because it's such a big, powerful sector there, that sector has the ability to affect change, right? NFPA is born out of that, right? It's maybe that's the angle, just sort of at a macro level. They start incentivizing and disincentivizing through premiums and claims behavior towards IAQ and better construction. Now, how you lobby for that, I don't know. But, the insurance sector is one of the few sectors that is like the 8,000-pound gorilla that can actually get things done.
Right.
But that's a good point. Let me ask on your side with building more efficient buildings. I saw an article the other day that there is starting to be some incentive through insurance and other ways to get people to build better buildings in the first place, or to renovate them properly. Do you see that?
So I was talking about this on the call earlier today. There are sort of three things that drive building efficiency. One of them is the cost of energy, and in North America, that's low. So that isn't really a driver. I don't care what anyone says, it's not. The next one is legislation. And then the one after that is like competing on virtue signaling, like LEED, right? The genius of LEED is in America and Canada, where energy costs are very low in comparison to the rest of the world, LEED creates a motive to do better with sustainability and energy efficiency, right? So you compete on virtue. I've got gold, he's got platinum, right? So that is the genius of LEED. But the real thing the only thing that really does move the needle, insurance industry notwithstanding, is legislation. Right now, again, in North America, that's hard because we have this multi-layer government, local authority, state, federal. So it's very hard to get things changed. And how many building codes are in America? There's 50 states, there's international building code, there's federal. It's a bloody nightmare of confusion.
Well, that's where your colleague, we had him on the show, and he said that change will occur at the municipal level. It won't be federal, it won't be national. Yes. It'll be individual municipalities saying, okay, we're done. We have to change what we're doing. It was a good comment, and that was, I don't know how many years ago, but that was... Yeah,
that's Saeed. I'm working with him now. He's a clever guy. And he's right, because he's seen that where he is. The most effective change in the Middle East has really come from municipal governments who are just saying, we want to be better. We want to attract better investment. We want to attract, like these transnational firms. So they've taken it on themselves to legislate locally to do that.
Another area I think that does push change is legal issues and the legal ramifications of letting your building get to the point where people are developing health issues as a result of your poor planning or negligence or poor maintenance or whatever it may be. Do you see that? Like I'm still wondering what the blowback has been from that large cladding fire that was in the UK. Adam, you're over there. You've probably dealt with this quite a bit. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So just on the litigation thing, litigation is an effective tool in the US because the way the US courts work, they're based on English common law, which is sort of pretty common in most places I go, but the awards in US courts can be very high. So that acts as an incentive and disincentive in and of itself, and the insurance industry is tied into that, right? But in the UK, there was a fire, just for our listeners, it's about 4 years ago now. There was a tower, an old tower called the Grenfell Tower in London. It was a residential tower that had been reclad, and there was a fire. And the fire spread to the cladding, and the cladding spread the fire across vertically up and down the horizontal. So the fire spread really fast, and it was a disaster. It was the worst disaster since the bombing of London in World War II. I can't remember, 70 plus people died. It was just horrific. Now, the UK's government reaction to that was, because the UK is not like, state, federalist, the government can be quite fast to react there. So they went nuts. They wanted to put someone in jail for this, right? So, they literally went crazy, and they couldn't pin it on anyone, right? Because of the lack of information, the lack of documentation on design decisions. They couldn't pin it on, the cladding wasn't really up to snuff. It didn't meet certain things, but that wasn't documented. So then they went for the architects who passed it on to the engineer. There was just this circle of it's not me, it's him. And the next issue was they couldn't pin it on anyone. So what they've done is they've uprated and changed all the building regulations, and that's just coming into law now. It's called the Building Safety Act, and they're doing a thing so that what they're bringing in is accountability. So they're doing a thing called the golden thread. So every design decision going forward after this law is enacted will have to be documented. So if there's ever another Grenfell, someone goes to jail, right? So they're calling this the golden thread. So every design decision has to be documented with a name and the information about the materials that's selected, the design decision behind it, who made it. And then the building control, which is the authority having jurisdiction, There's going to be personal liability on them as well. A lot of people are leaving and retiring. They've gone, well, that's I'm out. But so we're moving into a world, and I think this will cross the pond eventually. This level of accountability, because what's happening for the design teams now, they're all developing software to capture all this because they have to by law, and then archive it, right? So I think this will cross over the Atlantic at some point. Now, this leads me on to I'm always a bit of a sort of futurologist. You know, with the technology that's available to us now, let's take IEQ, for example, right? Not many people know it, but it's like 12 points, so how many sort of different vectors are on it, right? We're in a world now, or very soon to be, where you could measure all these things, humidity, temperature, noise level, VOCs, accurately with a cheapish device that could be networked and could send data into a cloud, but also you can control off them things, right? You can alarm off them things. So I think maybe 10, 20 years from now, you'll be buying a house where all these points will be measured and the environmental systems will control against them, and you'll have an alarm if they go out of range. And hopefully all this data would be open source, and you would create these like benchmarks that people would compete against. I think we're moving to that world. And I call that a world of evidence-based design through the golden thread and evidence-based control and operation. And there, building owners find out who's bullshitting and who's not, right? Who's building the good buildings, who's not? Who's controlling it, who's not? Who's the good engineer, who's not? I don't think that world is as far away as you think. And it's going to make people realize how much we've all been winging it till now.
Yeah, the big challenge in a lot of that is the lobby groups that will fight that tooth and nail.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm hoping for society that they lose, and because right now they're winning. You know, I think when I go back, this is going back now, I think 15, 20 years ago, when there was a movement to try to increase the R value in residential buildings, and the lobby group for the National Association of Home Builders, Joe, down in your area, fought it. Tooth and nail. They just said, no, it'll increase costs. It's the same thing with fire suppression systems in residential buildings. You know, they fought that one because it'll just increase costs. I mean, some areas will allow it and promote it, but other areas just not in our house. So
that's, the cost is an important factor. If we make things so expensive that no one can buy them, that's going to be a problem, although I don't agree with using the cost as the only reason for not doing something.
Yeah. So this is where the dark arts of promotion come in as well, right? So someone put up on LinkedIn the other day, a Toronto cost consultant broke down the cost of a high-rise condo. So it turns out construction is about 45%, soft cost design about 12%, developers profit about 10 to 15. 24 to 27% is government fees and taxes. Just in the construction. This isn't property tax afterwards, right? So if you're spending $400,000 on a condo in Toronto, 25% of that is taxes and fees.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's probably not dissimilar to any other jurisdiction in North America, right?
Yeah.
You've got to get that money somewhere. So,
I was going to add to that, when you develop a set of skills in doing design work and you look at people that want to do cost cutting, there's lots of areas when you look at poor design, poor assemblies that add to that cost, but good engineering can remove it, And the thing is that people need to understand, and particularly in the residential side, when someone comes to build a house, they've got a checkbook, not old term, right? But they've got a value of money sitting in a bank account, either it's finance or that's sitting there, or it's a joint of something. They're going to spend the money one way or another, right? Yeah. And we have all these people, particularly in the mechanical trades, trying to save people money, right? These are people that are trying to be the financial advisors for really wealthy people. It's just, when I look at designs, I know I can easily find, like in a residential system, sometimes 5 to 10% of the value of that system is wasted because it's oversized equipment, improper selection of equipment, redundant systems that aren't necessary. There's lots of places to save money without compromising the quality of a project.
There's so much that can be done and so much is not being done. Lobbying is a big factor in North America. Mm-hmm. I think the only way this changes is when owners of homes and users of homes are educated to the point on IAQ, IEQ, and where the costs really go, that they demand things. If there's a buyer's strike on houses, things will change pretty damn quick, right? You stop buying something, it's amazing how fast industries and lobbying groups change. But until that time comes, it's got to be demand driven, I think.
Well, that's where Joe's comment about K through 12, like educating people while they're in that time of their life where they're learning about stuff, because they leave high school and they don't know how to buy a house. No. They haven't got a clue. But if you make it part of the science curriculum, that's brilliant, Joe.
I think it would also help us improve our school buildings, because if these kids start to learn this shouldn't be this way, and then they push their parents, well, the parents are paying the taxes and they're electing the school board, you'll get better school buildings as well if you start to teach these young people.
It's really odd that every school building I've ever worked on, I avoid them like the plague nowadays. They are the ones that are value engineered down to absolutely worse than residential, which I didn't think was possible. But they're value engineered below that. Do you know what I mean? It's amazing how bad they are.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Robert. I just have two questions for you.
Well, I was just going to say that, Bill Bonfleff has been doing I don't know. There's he needs a kind of like a humanitarian award for the work that he's done in COVID and educating. Yeah. But part of his programs outreach has been with the school systems, and we had him on twice, one for the province of Alberta, one for the province of British Columbia, and it was addressing bad information that was coming from school board trustees and operators and facility managers. And it was amazing how many people within the school system that were designing and operating buildings thought that that if they were designed to ASHRAE standards, that it's adequate. And people needed to know that the ASHRAE ventilation rates weren't to deal with pathogens.
No.
At all, and so we had school board officials saying to the parents that your kids are fine, they're safe, they've been designed to ASHRAE standards. Well, as anybody that's been listening to the programs know, the ASHRAE standards are on a continuum, they get updated. So when was that building built? And what were the rates at that time? And then secondly, the rates weren't sufficient for dealing with pathogens anyway. So bullshit.
And are you actually getting those rates? That's where your commissioning and ongoing commissioning comes in.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Adam, it's time to thank some people who are on our side. Blue Rhythm Commissioning Software.
Blue Rhythm is the commissioning software I've been looking for. Most projects I consult on suffer from poor information and document management. Frankly, it's just chaos out there. Blue Rhythm removes this chaos. It is a secure, always available cloud solution designed to work on any computer, tablet, or smartphone. Their Android and iOS apps allow seamless transition between online and offline work. But what I like most about Blue Rhythm is their painless and fast onboarding process. Their team will bring all your existing forms and checklists into Blue Rhythm for you, or you can use or adapt their pre-built, pre-functional, and functional performance test sheet templates. But it's more than that. It enables collaboration, automation, and easy planning and project management for all your projects. Blue Rhythm provides amazing support from a team that really understands your industry. To find out more, go to bluerhythm.com or call country code +1 612 460 8305. Also, you can hear from Blue Rhythm President Andy Martin on episode 26 of the Edifice Complex podcast. Robert, we there yet? I'm bored.
Adam, I know it's hard to believe, but the future has finally arrived in Canada.
How's that then?
Well, smart remote building and equipment management is now available from SensorSuite.
Go on.
Sensor Suite, yep. They're an innovator in smart building technology. We like them. They can monitor, control, and optimize anything in your building, saving you time and energy.
You mean Sensor Suite are moving Canadian buildings into the 21st century?
Yeah, I know, another hard thing to believe, but they're doing it, and they're saving owners money with efficiency gains.
Okay, I'm in. How do I find out more?
Got to go to sensorsuite.com or call 1-855-773-6767. And also check out the July 2020 episode of the Edifice Complex podcast and listen to Sensor Suite CEO Glenn Spry.
And now, back to the show.
But that brings up one of the things I wanted to mention. I don't know if you're familiar with Haven IAQ. We had them on the show not long ago, and they're doing exactly what Adam talked about. They're putting sensors in the ductwork that will help not only evaluate the indoor air quality, but also can make the adjustments to the system. So if your relative humidity is too high, they can, tweak the dehumidifier to drop it a little bit. I agree. I think we'll see more and more of that as time goes on. Whether it will be open source or not, I don't know how you get to that point, Adam, but I guess maybe the universities and the research people are going to have to drive that.
Yeah, open source is such a great idea, but everyone resists it, right? Because they want to try and keep their information proprietary and make money out of it. But just if you could open source just basic stuff like basic EUI, energy use intensity for building types, and then have that out there that designers can then reference and benchmark and then claim they're beating it or not. That would be something, right? But it would take a drive at a very high, powerful level, like the president of ASHRAE make that one of their things during their term or something. That's the sort of power you need behind that.
Well, and one of the things that kind of demonstrates how difficult that is, we can't even get research to be open source. I've got to pay to get a paper to help people understand certain topics, and that's
don't get me started on that one, Joe. That whole topic pisses me off. There was an architect, and I can't remember her name right now, and forgive me, but we were at a conference, and she said, and then with an expletive deleted, for God's sakes, we're trying to save the planet. Share your information.
Yep.
There was an F word in there somewhere.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, and so I wrote an article about that, about having to pay for research work, and I think my final conclusion was I bought shares in the publishing houses because it's the only way I could finance my purchases of the papers that they were selling.
I got a question for both of you. You both have more of a worldview. You're not, just focused on America or the U.S. or even North America. Are you seeing this being done right anywhere else as far as building better buildings, having more sensors in the buildings that help control different parameters? Is any part of the world or any country in the world doing a better job in your mind than the rest?
So I'll take that if you want, Robert.
Yeah.
Because so I'm seeing in the UK. So what you got to understand about North America is I've worked in 20 countries now, right? And the price, there's a reason. So I'm a Canadian and a Brit, right? Well, I've got this British accent. Although I'm told I don't have that anymore when I go back to the UK. The North America is blessed, right? I know people won't believe this, but the cost of energy is really low in North America, and the living is good, and the resources are high, right? So when you go to the UK, the cost of energy is actually a lot higher, and it's a factor in thinking in buildings, right? So consequently, there's a lot more attention on energy efficiency and how buildings are built and air tightness and things like that, right? So there is, it's driven by economics normally, right? If things are expensive, then solutions arrive to mitigate them, right? So one of the problems North America has, it's blessed with an abundance of cheap energy. It's got a lot of resources. When you go to other parts of the world, it's not that way. So I see, like in the UK, there's a lot more buildings tend to be done to high levels of efficiency, better standards of construction, not because they're Brits and they're great, because that's driven by input costs like energy, and there's less layers of government, so building regulations or building code are changed a lot more frequently there with less resistance and lobbying. So, that's where I see it.
I mean, Denmark is probably one of the world leaders in driving change, getting off of hydrocarbons for conditioning buildings, integrating societies through their district energy and cogeneration systems. They've got a mandate to be off natural gas. Actually, it's very quickly. I think it's in 2025 or something like that. Like, it's coming up. And so, when you think about their drive for wind power, photovoltaics, they generate power from their waste systems. They're I would say, out of all the countries around the world that I'm familiar with, Denmark is probably one of the leaders. Yeah. Joe, you see the architecture that's developed over there, and it's all based on long-term visions, lots of, conservation is one thing, efficiency is another one, and then exergy efficiency is another one. We won't have time to get into that today, but all of their buildings have an ethos of conserve energy. When we use energy, we have to use it efficiently. And when we do convert it, we have to be able to extract the maximum amount of work out of it. That country is defined by those three principles.
It's the signals of cost and regulation, right? So the cost and building code would be the way to describe that in North American terms. And that's really what drives it. And that's why I think, and I'm not saying this because I'm a Brit, I think building efficiencies and construction standards are a lot higher, certainly in the UK and Europe, not because they're better than North America, it's just because the drivers are different. The cost of energy are higher, the building regulations are different, right? So they respond to that. I mean, constructors all around the world are the same. They want to do minimum compliance, right? So it's also a cultural phenomenon. What will your culture put up with in terms of construction, right? And then in North America, it's blessed. We got a lot of resources in North America. I mean, I live in Canada, right? It's a great country. I emigrated here for a reason, right? It's a great country. We got oil, we got resources, we got space. Cost of energy is low. I know most people find that difficult to believe, but it is. The cost of gas for your car is low. And, we are blessed in North America, and that can be a curse in terms of trying to move the needle on building efficiency, right? So, for example, radiant heating and cooling solutions are very common in other parts of the world I've worked, not in North America, right? Everything is let's blow air at it. So there's a couple of reasons for that. One is energy is cheap in North America, and two, the manufacturing and the procurement process is geared up for that. So when I first moved to North America and started working on projects, you'd be in design meetings, I go, let's do radiant. And it's not going to happen, radiant heating and cooling, because the supply chain is so optimized for air systems, right? There's also legacy issues. So, really, price is the best driver of everything, right? Until energy costs in North America go right up, I don't think a lot is going to change, unfortunately.
I'm curious, I don't know if either of you get to the Middle East or to China or evaluate how they're handling these issues. I get the impression in the Middle East, they're innovating. They have energy, obviously. They don't maybe have to innovate as much as we do, but they seem to be doing it anyway. Is that window dressing, or is that a serious, effort?
It's a serious effort, but it's driven by different factors. So yes, there's a lot of energy there, and it's cheap, and it's heavily subsidized for local users. However, the climate is harsh. But they're in the business of attracting investment, foreign direct investment, and people. And one of the ways they do that is by being as first world and progressive in terms of built environment, as an example, as possible, right? So, they compete over there on number of green buildings, number of LEED gold buildings, things like that. But there's also behind that, there is a recognition. I mean, I've been going to the Middle East for the last 25 years as a professional. There's also a recognition of an energy transition coming down the pipe as well. of moving away from hydrocarbons. It's probably the last generation over there that's going to have an abundance of cheap energy, I would say.
Adam, we had a guest on, I don't remember if it was Saeed or if it was Holly Chant, and they were talking about in the early days of the development of Dubai, how much North American architecture influenced their architecture, and how they realized after several years of operating these all glass buildings, they said, yeah, this isn't going to work for us in our climate zone. It was time to go back to vernacular architecture, which works for us for thousands of years.
Yeah.
So maybe part of this innovation that we're seeing, Joe, over there has actually a result of, well, we went down one path that didn't work for us, so let's fix this and not do the same thing going forward.
Interesting. What about China? Same question.
China, I've never worked in China. I've worked in Taiwan and I've worked in other parts of Asia. China is really cost-driven, and it's not. Their environmentalism is driven by necessity, not desire. So they are actually ahead in many areas, but it's driven by cost and lack of resources rather than, like, I want to be the trendiest, greenest place on the planet. Mm-hmm. So, but I haven't got any real direct experience in China. But, the scale of things over there is enormous. I mean, there are like 10 million person cities over there that no one's ever heard of, and there's hundreds of them. It's hard to describe the scale of what goes on there to us in North America who have space and, it's just another world. It quite frankly is. But I worked in Taiwan, did a project in Taiwan. That was interesting. And there's a lot of, but let's talk about the environmental movement and LEED for a second, right? So I blow between total at it and admiration for it. It sort of goes backwards and forwards for me, right? So what is really, where it does work is it's aspirational, and it moves the needle in places where energy is cheap. It gives you a way to compete on something, right? So, there's a lot of that going on in the world. Certainly in Asia and certainly in the Middle East. Is my building gold? Is it net zero? I think that is a much bigger driver nowadays than people realize in terms of moving the needle forward and getting things better in terms of outcomes and performance. And Asia has an abundance of good engineers and an abundance of willpower to want to do it. And I think the plus side to all these green building certifications and net zero certifications is they're aspirational, and engineers and clients in Asia are jumping on that bandwagon, and it's having a real positive effect. The downside to them schemes is that a lot of them are BS, and there's a lot of BS within them, right? But net, I think they're a positive in terms because they're aspirational, and where energy is cheap, they provide a reason to move the needle right in the right direction.
I do know that about 12 years ago, we had representatives from China participate in our Standard 55 committee, which is the thermal environmental conditions for human occupancy. And the reason why they were there is because they were writing their own standard for China, which ultimately got published. And the reason why I say that is that they're not readily supportive of sending delegates from China to participate in these standard organizations unless there's a good reason for it, and I can tell you that the communications that we had with the individuals was sensitive. They held the document and the development of the document very close to their chest. They were willing to share, but they knew they had to share in order to get information as well, right? So they understood the communication, but they were also very guarded about it. And they were also very sensitive in terms of having that freedom to come over and participate in the organization and then to go back and then to write their own standards. So I think, it's a big country, and like Adam, like you said, the population is very high, and they're very, very small influence, but they are making steps to improve buildings for sure.
And it's driven by need, right? I mean, in North America, we're very resource blessed. So a lot of our work is aspirational and morally sort of driven. Whereas in some parts of the world, it's absolutely required to be energy efficient and move the needle fast as possible, right? And China's a good example of that. There's a massive population there and a move to the cities, so there are just massive cities over there you've never even heard of. They've got millions and millions of people in. It's hard to freaking fathom actually how big that place is and how populated it is. So, anything that moves the needle for me is good, but it's the sustainability movement. I love the ethos of it, but every building is local, right? Every economy is local, and you're responding to the local constraints and demands. So, what I've come to realize since I've lived in North America, how blessed we are in Canada and America with, geography, natural resources, even war, right? To invade North America, you've got to get across two massive oceans. Well, that's pretty tough. So, There's a reason I moved from the UK to Canada, mate. Believe me, there was a lot of thought that went into that process. And
keep in mind that we live in a world where, if you want to look at two bookcase ends, North Korea, South Korea, right. I mean, South Korea is advanced. Their big push on proper architecture, indoor environments, conservation of energy. They're a great country, and then on the other side of the border is like the dark ages.
See, I wonder, have either of you experienced with India? Because when you're looking at sustainability, the three big, the big drivers or the big users, I guess I could say, is China, India, and North America. What's going on with India?
I've been there. I did a small project there. It was actually a digital manuals project, but I've got a friend who lives there. So India is just basically a case of too many people and not enough stuff, right? It's just, so, they're trying to move the needle, but it's really, really hard.
And a tough environment on top of that.
Tough environment. They got population constraints in terms of a lot of people. They got a lot of resource constraints. They're in a tough neighborhood. It's a real tough nut to crack.
There's a lot of frustrated scientists in India because they have the knowledge. They know, well, then they're smart people, and they've come up from one of the oldest civilizations on the planet. They understand economics, they understand science, they understand social issues, they understand a lot of things, and they see other parts of the world evolving. And, we see these individuals that come again to our meetings, and they're as smart as the smartest people, around. And they have a hard time within their own boundaries, their own borders, making these changes because it is such a big machine.
I mean, it's a billion plus population, right? It's the scale of it is until you go there and just see how many people there are everywhere, and how you even accommodate that many people to a standard of living that we have in North America is probably impossible, actually. So it makes moving the needle on the built environment difficult, right? Because there's stratas. There's a certain amount of population just surviving, and then having a nice energy efficient anything just doesn't even register. And then, but there is a middle class, emerging middle class and upper class that are interested and trying to move that needle, but it's a tough nut to crack, and it's going to take time.
A lot of poverty, and that really makes everything harder when you're just trying, like you said, when you're just trying to feed yourself and your family and have some kind of shelter. You'll do whatever it takes, and that's a shame. Gentlemen, I think we're gonna have to wrap up here pretty soon. John, I know, has to get ready to put a show up for us. We're gonna do a flashback this week. I've had a great time. I don't know if you have any final questions or thoughts.
Yeah, I do. I do want to send regards out to Cliff, and it's unfortunate we weren't able to talk to him today. And but send our regards to him. Do miss talking, hearing his voice, and And again, congratulations, Joe, on just, you guys have been leaders, and it's just awesome to see you guys do what you do. And thanks.
What's awesome, Robert? We're actually not losing money. Thank you, sponsors. I love you all. We're not making money, but we're not losing money, and that is a big change over the last 16 years.
Yeah. Do you know what? Salute for being going for 16 years. I didn't realize. I know you've been going a while. I didn't realize it was that long. So well done on that, man. That was talk about first to market. Wow.
The only comment I guess other than that is that I think every once in a while, Joe, you and Cliff and Adam and I ought to get together. I don't know, make it an anniversary thing every 3-4 years or something, just see what catch up.
What we should do is the Built Environment State of the Union address.
Yeah, for sure.
There you go. Yeah. And I think it would be great to have Cliff on. He has a tremendous perspective, and hopefully we'll be able to do that again real soon.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay. How long has the Edifice complex? How long have you guys been around? A little while now.
Yeah, 5 years maybe.
Okay,
so it was 6 years nearly. Actually, so we only post one a month. So when we started, we wanted to make it so we could be consistent. So we settled on one a month because obviously we're both working at the time and got careers to manage, and we sort of stayed with that. Now and again, we do a few special episodes, but generally we stay with that. So we've been around a long time, but in terms of absolute numbers, nowhere near your benchmark, right? You guys have been pumping it out wholesale. Salute to that as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
It's some people, we get people that will call and they're starting a new podcast, and do you have any tips? And I tell them, number one, don't expect to make any money. Secondly, it's a lot harder getting a guest week after week after week than you would realize. So your once a month was a brilliant decision, and you're going to put a lot of time and effort into it, and you've got to be consistent. You've got to plug away and keep at it, and over time things turned around for us, and we're doing fairly well.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things I think that when you look at your show and our show, we do it because we care. We do it because we want to make a difference. One of the ethos of our podcast was to leave behind a legacy of voices, that was timeless. And as you have done, I mean, your archives it's a library that the information that from your show day one is still relevant today and will be relevant in 100 years from now.
Well, thank you.
That's admirable. Yeah, for sure.
I agree. That's why we do it.
Yeah,
we've got some great people like yourself and now Adam on the show, and it's a labor of love. We'll keep it up as long as we can.
Got that right.
Okay, man. So thanks very much for that, and let's call it a wrap. So this is for my video editor, right? So he knows that's an edit. So
it's what do they call that? On PBS by what is it, John?
What, break or
No, they have that on PBS. They do these 1 minute segments with people, and that's part of the clap. Is I can't remember.
Well, that's the hook coming on and pull it.
You're out of here.
So look, that was great. I'll speak to our editor, and we'll aim to get it out next Friday. That's when you're planning to drop your episode, right?
Yes, sir. And John, if you want to, if you could make a little note on where you're making edits, so maybe they could pass that along to their editor and make his job a little easier.
So what we're going to do is we normally do an intro and outro, but we won't do the outro, Robert. We won't do a wrap up, right?
That's fine.
The special. So the only thing we're planning to edit out is that bit in the middle where you had a bit of a mind stall.
Well, it's funny because Joe, when you had when you were sort of trying to remember what you were thinking about, I had to do the same thing. It's a good thing Jonathan was online because he triggered the thoughts again.
That's why I'm here, guys. That's why I'm here.
Must not have been very interesting. That's
clearly
all.
Jonathan's under the age of 40, so
Barely getting there.
We also do a little thumbnail. We do a little thumbnail. We do a little short clip as well to promote it.
Okay.
So I'll share that with you, and we'll try and publish on the same time. But it depends heavily on my editor's availability. So I'll get a hold of him today and make sure he can do it. If not, you can drop it, then we can drop ours later. It's not a problem. But I think we should try and drop the same time if we can. Drop them at the same time.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And also a name for the episode. I don't know what to call this. We call it the. I don't know. I'll think of something and then I'll run it by you.
Okay, because we don't have a name either, so that would be great.
Let's try and make it a little bit pithy, like mash up or something. I don't know. We'll work it out anyway. Don't worry about it.
All right.
Solving world problems in an hour.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There we go. Solving all the world's problems in an hour. There you go. Guys.
All right, everybody.
Hey.
Always a pleasure.
Cheers, man.
Take care, Robert. Adam, nice to meet you, sir. Take care, guys.
You've been listening to the Edifice Complex podcast with Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean. To access show notes for this episode, visit edificecomplexpodcast.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. See you next time.